Useless old woman. Aren't you going to make lunch? My dill shouted at me in front of the guests. After I served the meal, she threw a plate of food on the floor and said, "Clean that up." The next day at the office, she got a surprise that made her go pale. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. If I fail today, I'll lose the last thin claim to my own home and the small voice inside me that still remembers who I am. Where's lunch? Kayla's voice cracked across the dining room like a drop tray, sharp enough to make forks freeze midair. 12 guests turned their heads as one. I stood in the doorway with a sweating pitcher of water and a smile I'd learned to wear like a bandage. The room went quiet, silverware settling onto china, conversations cutting off mid-laugh. My son, Michael, cleared his throat and said nothing. I told them the roast needed 10 more minutes. It didn't. It had been ready for 20. I just needed those minutes for my hands to stop shaking. Kayla flicked her wrist, bracelets flashing. 10 more? People are starving. She had the kind of voice that could charm a wedding crowd or strip paint. I slipped back to the kitchen. The oven's breath was warm against my face as I checked again out of habit, basting for show. I'd cooked since dawn because Kayla texted at 7 that she'd invited a few extra. A few was 8. I cooked anyway. I always cooked anyway. The roast went to platter, vegetables haloed around it the way my mother taught me. I balanced the weight and carried it back out, heel in my hand throbbing where the pan's heat kissed through the towel. "Finally," Kayla said. Polite laughter skimmed the table. I served in silence, a ghost with a serving fork, smiling at friends of friends sitting in seats that once knew my children's homework and my late husband's newspaper. When I reached Kayla, she leaned back, eyes cool. "The meat looks dry," she announced, "and these veggies are mush." A few guests found their wine. A few found their shoes. Michael found his lap. "I'm sorry," I said, because that was the only currency I'd been allowed to spend. She waved me off toward the kitchen, told me to bring something edible from yesterday, a dish that didn't exist. Power performs best with an audience. I set the platter down and turned away, cheeks hot. That's when I heard it. The slow scrape of ceramic over wood, deliberate as a dare. Then the crash. Beef, carrots, and hot gravy exploded across the floorboards my husband had installed by hand 30 years ago. "Oh no," Kayla breathed, paper-thin concern laid over steel. "Look what happened. Please clean it up before it stains." 12 faces watched me like I was a trick ending on a show. Some pitying, some bored, one trying not to grin. I went to my knees. Hot gravy soaked into paper towels and crept between boards. A carrot slice clung to my palm. The room buzzed again, conversation carefully skirting the mess. In the corner, Michael laughed at a guest's joke and didn't look down. On my knees, I felt something give way inside, but it wasn't resignation. It was a latch lifting on a door I'd braced shut for 3 long years. I kept wiping. When the boards were no longer wet, I carried the trash to the kitchen, washed my hands until they chilled, and then I didn't go back. I walked down the hall to the little room that used to be Michael's when he was 9 and afraid of thunderstorms. It was my room now, my exile, with a twin bed, a dresser, and a mirror that didn't flatter anyone. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the woman in the glass. Hair pinned back because it got in the way of chores. Shoulders rounded from leaning over sinks, over stoves, over other people's moods. A stranger looked back. I didn't recognize the way she kept herself small to keep the peace. I opened the bottom drawer and slid my fingers under sweaters until they found leather. The folder was slim and cool, a quiet thing that had outlasted anniversaries and in-law visits, and 2 winters of pretending I didn't know how to program the television. I hadn't opened it in 3 years, not since Kayla and Michael moved in with the language of, "just until we get back on our feet." I let them believe I lived on Michael's father's insurance and Social Security. I clipped coupons, nodded at lectures about budgeting, and listened to a young woman explain the modern world to me like I hadn't built one of my own. I clicked the folder open. Paper whispered. Statements, deeds, quarterly reports with my name at the top. Assets laid out in quiet lines. A mid-rise downtown that wore my signature in its bones. Apartment buildings that sent rent the way the tide comes in. Steady. Inevitable. A holding company with a name I chose when the kids were little, when nights were long and ideas were cheap. I traced the letterhead with my finger, then the line where my title sat. Memory rose like heat. Boardrooms, window glass warm beneath my palm while I watched the city grow. I closed the folder and placed it on the quilt. My pulse slowed until it felt like counting. In the dining room, laughter swelled and faded. I could have stayed in that small room forever, careful and invisible. I had, but something different had arrived with the sound of plate on wood. It was not anger. It was a decision. I stood, washed the perfume of onions and thyme off my wrists, and smoothed my skirt. Kinetic beats come like knocks on a door. The first was the crash. The second was the old alarm clock glowing 5:27 a.m. the next morning. The house still as a church. I brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen, the same kitchen where Gravy had filmed the floor, and stood looking at the faint stain that wouldn't quite polish away. Tangible consequences stay to keep you honest. I set my phone on the counter and scrolled to a name I hadn't called since before Michael boxed up my office for Kayla's yoga mats. "Tom," I said when he answered, voice crisp despite the hour. "This is Ruth." I could hear the smile in his breath before the words. He'd been my property manager longer than most of the city's cafes had been open. "Good morning, Miss Hart," he said, weight shifting into the old groove. "How can I help?" "I need a termination letter prepared for an employee at a tenant company," I told him, effective immediately. I gave the details, who, where, and felt a bright, steady line draw itself from my front door to the building that carried my name on its mechanical systems and lease ledgers. "Coordinate with lobby security," I said. "I'll be there at 9. "Understood," Tom said. "We'll be ready." I hung up and poured another cup. Upstairs, the shower started. Kayla's voice, damp with steam, floated down the hall. "Where's breakfast? I have a client meeting." She was already performing a day that would not arrive as she'd planned. I let the coffee warm my hands and didn't answer. It was astonishing how much life opened when I chose not to explain myself. They swept through the kitchen at 7:30, perfume and cologne chasing each other. Michael reached for cereal. Kayla scoffed and her earrings chimed. "Do you even care what I look like when I walk into an office?" she said to him. "Not to me." I checked the fruit bowl and the empty egg carton. I said I wasn't sure we had everything for Eggs Benedict. "Figure it out," she said, already snapping on her watch. Then they were gone, tires whispering down the street, the house returning to a sound I realized was called peace. I walked to the bedroom closet and pushed aside cardigans to where 3 suits waited like old friends. Navy, charcoal, black. I chose navy. It still fit. Muscle memory guided my hands through zippers and a quiet knot at my throat. Makeup went on lightly, just enough to reflect the person I actually was back to the world. The mirror offered someone I recognized, someone with a life outside this house and this kitchen, a woman who signed checks that paid other people's paychecks, a woman whose opinion had rearranged conference tables. I slid the folder into my bag. In the hall, I paused at the doorway to the dining room. Last night's centerpiece had gone wilted in a ring of water. A guest had left a napkin on a chair. The faint stain on the floorboards had darkened to the color of weak tea. I knelt with a fresh cloth and worked until the wood warmed under my fingers, until it looked like a story in the process of being corrected. By 8:45, I was pulling into the garage beneath the downtown tower, the attendant lifting his hand in a double take that became a grin. "Morning, Ms. Hart," he said. I knew his name. His wife had a baby last spring. "Morning, Ray," I said. and took the elevator that sighed all the way up, cables singing a note that I felt in my bones. My office looked exactly as I'd left it. The desk, a ship's prow, the windows owned by the sky. I stood there for a quiet breath that tasted like leather and lemon oil, then texted Tom a simple, "Here." He replied, all set, instantly, because he had always known how to read the weight of a day. Kayla's office sat across the atrium, a fishbowl of glass and bright branding where ambition wore heels. Through the glass, I could see her laugh with a colleague, blue blazer, fresh blowout, a woman certain of the ground under her feet. For a second, my hand hovered over the folder in my bag. There's a moment before you become who you need to be, where you can still step back into the old life's smaller shoes. I let the moment pass like a bus I didn't need to catch. I took the elevator down, crossed the atrium over the ribbed carpet that muffled power into polite conversation, and stepped into the tenant suite. The receptionist looked up from her screen and blinked, clocking my suit and my certainty. "Good morning," I said. "I'm here to see Kayla Reyes." My voice carried the kind of authority that makes doors behave. "May I tell her who's calling?" "Ruth Hart," I said. "She'll know." She did. I watched through glass as the receptionist spoke into the phone, and I watched Kayla's face change. It was not a look I'd seen her wear. Not at my table, not in my kitchen, not when she rearranged a room. She stood slowly and came toward me, steps careful like a person crossing ice she isn't entirely sure will hold. "Ruth," she said, my name an unfamiliar shape in her mouth. How did—" "We'll talk in your office," I said. "Now." Inside, the furniture looked new enough to creak. The window offered a slice of city I'd stared at from different glass many times. Kayla closed the door and pressed her back to it without meaning to. Her hands were perfect. They always were. "I'm in the middle of a project," she tried, voice wobbling into what she thought was professional. "This won't take long," I said. I opened my bag, set the folder on the desk, slid out the letter already printed on my company's stationery. I didn't need to say the company's name yet. Paper can speak. She read the first line. I watched the denial bloom, then fade, then something like comprehension unclench in her jaw. "You can't do this," she whispered, a reflex. "I already did," I said. "HR has been notified. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Your final check will be mailed." Her eyes searched my face, hunting for an old version of me that would flinch. I didn't hand it to her. Outside the office, keyboards clicked. Footsteps passed. The atrium's fountain murmured, water moving downward in patient tears. Who even are you?" Kayla finally asked, voice dropping as if volume could soften the shape of the day. I could have answered with titles. I didn't. "I'm the woman you told to get on her knees to clean your mess," I said. "I'm the woman who makes the calls that decide what kind of day you have." She reached for bravado and came up with air. "Michael won't allow this," she tried a last swing. "Michael doesn't run this building," I said gently. "And neither do you." At 59 minutes past the hour, there was a polite knock on the open doorway. 2 guards waited in the hall, hands folded, faces kind. Kayla stared at them, then back at me. For the first time since she'd moved into my house, she looked small. "Kayla," I said, and my voice surprised me with how even it was. "This is the most dignity you'll be offered today. Take it." She nodded without finding a word. She walked past me with the careful grace of someone stepping over the boundary between 2 lives. The guards fell in behind her at a respectful distance. The receptionist glanced up as the 3 of them passed and then down again, because workdays continue even when a story breaks at the edge of the carpet. I stood alone in the office and looked at the desk where Kayla had stacked her bright plans. Across the atrium, my windows waited, full of sky. Down on the street, buses kept their schedules. Somewhere, in a dining room that was mine again, a faint stain on hardwood darkened and then dried, less visible by the hour. The reversal had come right where it needed to. I had spent 3 years shrinking to avoid a storm, and in a single morning I chose to be the weather. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt accurate, returned to the right size for my life. Back upstairs, Tom met me with a nod and a folder of copies to sign. My hand was steady. After the last page, I stood at the window for a minute and watched the city move like it always had. Traffic lights deciding, bikes sliding through crosswalks, a man in a yellow jacket balancing 2 coffees. The world didn't tremble because I'd remembered my name. But the floor under my feet did feel level again. When I drove home, the house greeted me without bracing. I set my bag on the table, then took a damp cloth and knelt one more time in the dining room. The stain gave a little more. I didn't scrub like a servant, not anymore. I cleaned like an owner. I made lunch for myself, just toast and a sliced peach, and ate at the head of the table with the newspaper spread out, sunlight falling in squares across the wood. A hummingbird interrogated the lilacs outside the window. My knees ached from last night, so I stood and stretched until the ache eased. Then I took the folder back to my small room and slid it into its drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it where it belonged. I had failed quietly for a long time. Today I did not fail. Today I kept what was mine. The atrium kept humming after Kayla walked away with security, as if nothing particular had occurred. Fountain whispering, shoes ticking, emails breeding behind glass. My pulse quit trying to drum out of my neck and settled into the old workday rhythm. Decide, act, confirm. Tom met me just outside the tenant suite with a clipboard and the expression of a man who prefers procedures to drama. HR is drafting the formal, he said low. We'll need your signature on the action memo and on the access changes. Do it, I said. My voice surprised me by not trembling at all. We crossed to my side of the atrium. The elevator doors parted like they'd been waiting for me in particular. Tom hit the floor for our offices, then the button that stops extra riders. We rose. I watched the lobby shrink to a carpet square and caught my reflection in the stainless steel. Not a ghost, not a servant. A woman in a navy suit who belonged to the motion of the building. On 21, HR had already warmed a chair for me. Lila, efficient, kind eyes, a knack for turning chaos into checklists, slid a printed letter across the table. We'll courier this with the final payroll notice, she said. Badge deactivated at noon. I terminated accounts 10 minutes ago. Thank you, I said. She hesitated a beat like someone standing in a doorway between colleague and confidant. If I may, she added, we've had a few concerns come up about her use of your name in conversations with tenant staff. I'd like to capture them for the file. Capture them, I said. The last hour had reset the angle of the day. I signed where she flagged. The pen felt solid in my hand. Back downstairs, I paused at the atrium rail. Across the way, the tenant floor had resumed its everyday choreography. Phones lifted, heads bent, a messenger weaving through with a cardboard tube. The receptionist from earlier slipped out of her chair and walked toward me with the careful speed of someone approaching a skittish animal. Miss Hart? She asked. I just wanted to say, thank you. I know that's not professional. Her cheeks pinked. But she's been... The receptionist made a helpless little gesture that encompassed months. You don't have to finish the sentence, I said. Lila will be available if you want to document anything. It came out like a memo and a mercy. The young woman nodded, relieved and a little shocked that the air had changed. As I turned to go, a man in shirt sleeves who looked like he played tennis on Sundays stepped out of the bullpen and lifted a hand. Ms. Hart, he said. I'm the operations lead here. If anyone gives you grief about landlords meddling, it won't be from us. We were stuck. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The reversal landed simple and clean. Instead of blowback, there was quiet gratitude. The idea that I had overreached fell away like a coat I didn't need in this weather. The elevator let me ride alone again. My phone lit in my purse. Michael, 3 missed calls, then a text. "What did you do?" Followed by a second one, longer, full of punctuation and defense. I watched the little gray dots bubble. They paused, started again, died. I slid the phone back into my bag without answering. Not yet. On the garage level, Ray lifted his hand. "Everything okay?" he asked, in the careful tone people use when they've seen a small part of a big story. "Getting there," I said. "How's the baby sleeping?" "Like a champ," he grinned, and the world rotated once on the ordinary axis that keeps you sane. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked 2 blocks to the county clerk's building through air already warming fast, filed under a surname that still felt like mine instead of a history. The security guard waved me through after the scanner beeped at my bracelet. I took a number, waited between a woman renewing a DBA for her hair salon and a man arguing softly with himself. When my number lit, I asked for the homeowner forms. Notice to quit. General trespass advisement. The mildest version of a boundary that the law could express without flashing teeth. "You can download these online," the clerk said automatically. "I like paper," I said. "Paper behaves." I carried the packet to a table and read every line, timelines, posting requirements, the difference between 30 days and 60, the grace enabled by a rent ledger I never wanted from my own son. I didn't want court. I wanted a door that shut and a house that didn't wince when footsteps entered it. The forms made my intent plain to me. My hand got steadier with each clause. By the time I reached my car, the gray dots in my messages had returned with a torrent. "How could you embarrass her at work? Don't you think you could have talked to us first? Why are you punishing me for trying to build a life?" Under the words, I heard the boy who once asked me to check the closet for monsters. Under them, I heard the man who had been living like the house would mother him forever. I drove home in that narrow space where mercy and resolve hold hands and glare at each other. The dining room breathed around me when I came in. It had stopped holding its shoulders up by its ears. The faint stain on the floor was almost gone. I set the packet on the table next to my pen and a glass of water. The room had a courthouse hush. Through the window, the hummingbird returned, an emerald punctuation in the lilac. I wrote by hand first because hand slows thought and makes it honest. "Michael, I love you." That doesn't change. I'm writing instead of arguing because you're better at arguing and I'm better at deciding on paper. You and Kayla have 30 days to move out. This is not a punishment, it's a boundary. It's what adults do for each other when the living gets lopsided. From today until you move, you will not host guests here. You will not instruct me in my own kitchen. You will not speak to me in the tone you learned from someone who thinks people like me exist to serve. If you choose to ignore any of that, you will be asked to leave sooner. I am including a list of rentals within 10 miles with vacancy signs. I will pay first month's rent as a gift. After that, you will handle your life as a man. I will always be your mother. I am no one's servant. Mom, I read it twice and didn't adjust a word. Then I filled the formal notice with the same steady hand. Legal address, date certain, boxes checked. It felt clinical and it felt kind in the truest sense of the word, as in clarifying, as in cutting away infection so something can heal. Halfway through, tires whispered up the driveway. Doors slammed with more force than they needed. Voices flooded the hall. Kayla's honed brightness frayed to wire. Michael's baritone braided with it. The clock above the hutch ticked as if measuring an experiment. They walked in on the 2 pages, and the pen, and the glass of water. Kayla's makeup had surrendered at the edges, hair not quite perfect, the smallest chip in her polish like a confession. Michael's jaw worked. He looked 4 years old and 30 at once. "What is this?" he demanded, jabbing a finger at the top page. "Words," I said. "Read them." "You humiliated my fiancé," Kayla said, every syllable sharp enough to peel paint. The word fiancé landed on the table like a thrown ring, news delivered like a weapon. "Congratulations," I said. "You'll want your own lease then." She blinked, the blow not landing where she'd aimed. "You can't fire me," she pivoted, fury remembering its earlier grievance. "You don't even work there." "I own there," I said, "and I acted as the owner." I didn't raise my voice. The house had lived through enough noise. Michael flipped the second page and read the statute citation twice, lips moving like a child sounding out new shapes. "You're evicting me?" he asked, and the "you" felt larger than the rest of the sentence. "I'm asking you to start your adult life," I said. "In 30 days. I'm paying the first month because I love you and I won't weaponize money. After that, you will know yourself by the bills you pay and the keys you carry." Kayla tried to laugh. It came out like a cough. "You can't do this," she said, the same phrase in a new room. "I'm doing it," I said. "Argue the paperwork if you like. It will hold." Michael looked at me, then at the table, then at the floor stain he'd helped make without touching a plate. 30 days, he repeated like he was negotiating with time. "Where are we supposed to go?" "There's a list," I said. I slid it toward him. Apartments I'd photographed on my walk back from the clerks. Phone numbers penciled in, rough rents in the margin, a note beside one that said, "South Light, decent laundry." He stared at the paper, because sometimes it's easier than looking at your mother. Kayla found breath again. "This is elder abuse," she said, wild now, plucking a term she half remembered from a podcast. You're unstable." "Steady as a chalk line," I said, and felt the truth of it from the soles of my feet to the top of my scalp. For a long minute, nobody spoke. The house listened the way old houses do, with all their wood and memory. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck reversed in polite beeps. My pen lay where I'd set it, harmless as a spoon. 30, Michael said again, but there was less fight under it. Grief, mostly. Then a calculation I recognized, the one he used to do at the kitchen island over math homework when he still believed in showing his work. He swallowed. "Okay," he said, so quietly the room almost didn't catch it. 30. Kayla rounded on him, incredulous. "You can't be serious," she hissed. This is her house," he said, and looked at me like the words cost him something old and tender. "We'll figure it out." Another reversal, not dramatic, but true. He had been braced to defend her version of me. Instead, he met mine halfway. "Thank you," I said, because gratitude between adults is part of how you keep the floor level. They retreated down the hall toward their room. Suitcases thunked onto the bed. Cabinet doors opened and shut. Too loud, too fast, the sound of people trying to reassert a power they'd just discovered was on loan. I let them make all the noise they needed. The house could take it. When it quieted, I stood, slid my letter into an envelope, and set it under a paperweight shaped like a glass pear. The formal notice I pinned to the corkboard next to the calendar and the plumber's number, where it could be seen and not misremembered. I put the list of apartments on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse my husband had brought me from a business trip the year our daughter decided to live on another coast. "So you don't forget where home is," he'd said then. Now the magnet held a map to somewhere else that might someday earn that word for my son. My phone buzzed with a new text. Tom. All set. Badge off. HR complete. Also, 3 separate staff asked me to thank you. I stared at the screen until the words stopped swimming. It hadn't been about thanks. But the air in my lungs loosened anyway. In the afternoon, I walked the neighborhood, past porches that needed paint and roses that didn't, past the house where the retired teacher grows tomatoes big as fists, past a child on a scooter who waved like small people do when they're still confident the world is an audience. The day had arranged itself into a pattern I could live with. an action that mattered, a consequence I could carry. When I came back, a suitcase sat at the top of the stairs, open-mouthed. Kayla's voice floated from their room, tight and brittle, working its way through blame the way a needle works through fabric. Michael's answers were low and short, the way men talk when they have learned that a decision has already been made and their job is to meet it. I brewed tea. I set the mug on the table where the paperwork had been and watched Steam write temporary messages in the air. Tomorrow would be part 3, whether I was ready or not. Service, signatures, the legal shape of the boundary I'd drawn with a pen and a mother. Tonight I would do one more quiet thing that felt like an owner's work. I knelt on the dining room floor with a damp cloth and worked the last of the stain out of the boards. It yielded, finally, the way wood does when you're patient and firm. I sat back on my heels and pressed my palm flat against the place where the plate had shattered, and the door inside me had opened. The grain ran true under my hand. When the kettle clicked off again, I poured a second cup and carried it down the hall. I set it outside their door and knocked once. "For the packing," I said. Silence. Then finally, a muffled, "Thanks," from the voice I had loved first in this world. The elevator had delivered me to the part of the building where my office lived. The letter had delivered me to the part of my life where my home would again. The next morning began with paper. I printed 2 copies of the notice and slid one into an envelope with the letter I'd written. The other I posted inside on the corkboard by the calendar where chores and plumber numbers had lived for decades. Then I took a photo with the day's date glowing on the oven clock behind it, proof for a judge I hoped I'd never meet. Paper behaves. Photos behave too. At 9, a process server in a windbreaker that didn't match the weather knocked on the front door. He had the gentle politeness of people whose jobs require them to step into strangers' lives just long enough to make them official. "You're Ms. Hart?" "I am." He handed me a receipt and took the sealed envelope. "I'll serve them now," he said. "You can post as well, but this keeps the timeline clean." "Clean is all I want," I said. He knocked on their bedroom door with knuckles that sounded professional somehow. The hallway held its breath. Kayla opened it wearing a robe that said Sunday even though it was Tuesday. Her eyebrows went up when she saw him, then down when she saw the envelope. "Is this a joke?" she asked, the words aimed down the hall at me. "It's service," the man said, calm. "You've been notified." She took the envelope like it might stain. Michael appeared behind her, hair wild, eyes wincing from sleep. The server thanked them in a tone that made courtesy sound like a finality, then left as neatly as he'd arrived. The door closed. Paper had entered the room where opinions used to be enough. I brewed coffee. I didn't hide in the kitchen. I stayed in the dining room with the sun pushing long rectangles onto the floor and the faint stain now barely a rumor. When they came out, Kayla walked ahead the way people do when they're losing and won't let their shoulders admit it. Michael's gaze fell to the letter under the glass pair, then landed on me. "You hired a guy?" he said, like the word process belonged to a world he hadn't had to learn yet. "I did," I said. "It keeps the timeline clear." "We can't move in 30 days, Kayla hissed. "That's illegal." "The timeline matches the statute," I said. "You can check it with any clinic or advisor you like. You're free to do that today." She looked at me the way people look at a locked door. Michael reached for the apartment list on the fridge as if it were a page in a book he might someday want to claim as his. He didn't tear it down. He didn't put it back. He just held it where he could see his own handwriting start to imagine itself on a new lease. "We'll need 60, he said finally, not belligerent. "Just a man making an ask." "I've given 30, I said. "If you show me a signed lease with a move-in date beyond that by a week or 2, we'll work with it. But the direction is out, not deeper in." Kayla made a sound that was half laugh, half protest. "This is control," she said. "You can't stand that he chose me." "This is a house," I said. "It requires agreements. You've chosen a life that doesn't include mine as your maid. I'm insisting we all live honestly with that." Michael's jaw flexed. He unfolded the list. His finger paused on a building I knew. "South Light?" he asked, reading my note. "Good in the mornings," I said, "and decent laundry." It was the first real conversation we'd had in a long time that wasn't about groceries or the ghosts of past disappointments. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to sit with his cereal and recite dinosaur facts while I packed lunches. Then the moment closed, and the adults returned to the table. By noon, boundary maintenance became a series of small, necessary tasks. I collected the spare keys from the bowl near the door and laid them out. The back gate, the shed, the basement. "We'll rekey when you're settled," I said. "For now, let's respect each other." Kayla filmed me on her phone for a few seconds, not quite brave enough to narrate. The lens trembled. I wondered if her hand did too. After lunch, I called the utility companies and asked to make sure the bills reflected reality. Whose name? What meter? No more auto payments from accounts that were mine alone. Each customer service representative said, "Of course." In that bright, tired way, that means they've said it 200 times this week. The ordinary bureaucracy of a life can be a mercy. It hands you a list and asks you to complete it. "At 3, Tom called. "You okay?" he asked, blunt as a level. "Working the list," I said. "Good. Also, 2 tenants separately reported that Ms. Reyes has been circulating a story about, quote, a landlord abusing power. I told them to put anything they heard in writing. I thought you should know." There it was, the fault line extending beyond the foundation of my house, hairline cracks reaching downtown. "Thank you," I said. "If it grows beyond rumor, I'll engage counsel." The word counsel didn't feel like a threat. It felt like rain gear you keep by the door because weather is not personal. We hung up. I wrote lawyer. Ask Tom for the one he trusts on a sticky note and tagged it to tomorrow's square on the calendar. At 4:30, Kayla tried to schedule an emergency team huddle in my dining room. Her voice took on a manic brightness that has sold many things to many people. 3 colleagues started to arrive with tote bags and laptops and the breathless air of people who live on deadlines. I met them at the front steps, palms open. "Apologies," I said steady. "We're not hosting meetings here anymore. There's a coffee shop 3 blocks east with long tables and better Wi-Fi." Kayla appeared behind me. "Ignore her," she said, smile flashing toward the visitors while her eyes sliced at me. "It's fine. Come in." "It isn't," I said, and left the screen door closed between us like a gentle law. "This is a private home, not a workspace. You're welcome to collect anything you've left here. And then I need you to take your meeting elsewhere." The 3 exchanged glances with the survival instincts of small herds. The one with the tote bag cleared her throat. "We can do the cafe," she said. "I actually like their scones." Kayla's smile didn't reach her face as the herd peeled away. She turned back to me with an expression I'd never seen in a person, like a mirror that suddenly refused to reflect. "You're enjoying this," she said. "No," I said. "I'm repairing something." The door clicked shut between us with a sound that wasn't triumphant. It was precise. Dinner was quiet by request. I put a note on the fridge. "We'll share the kitchen from 6 to 7 p.m. Please plan around those hours." Kayla erased my handwriting with a paper towel, then realized I'd taken a photo of the note and printed it, time-stamped, and taped that one up instead. She stared at it and walked away. I scrambled eggs and ate them with toast. They ordered food that arrived in paper bags, smelling of cumin and apology. After, I took my tea to the back steps. The roses along the fence needed deadheading. I snipped until my fingers smelled green, and my mind thinned out into the evening's quiet. A neighbor passing with her dog lifted a hand. "Lovely light," she called. "It is," I said, letting the word carry more than the sky. Michael sat down 2 steps below me with the caution of a man approaching a wild animal and not sure whether it bites. "She says you hate her," he began. "Hate is heavy," I said. I don't lift it. I dislike how she treats me. I won't permit it anymore. Those are different weights. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture left over from a boy who used to stand there while I cut his hair. She's good at selling herself, he said, almost like an apology for the world. So are a lot of people, I said. The trick is whether they can live with the person who buys. He huffed a laugh despite himself. It died quickly. I didn't see it, he said. I mean, I saw it. I just didn't want a deal. You were tired, I said. Grief is a full-time job and it doesn't pay well. We watched the yard get bluer at the edges. Crickets started their civic chorus. The house behind us glowed like a lantern. I'm looking at 2 places tomorrow, he said finally. One's the South Light. The other is on Maple, 2nd floor. I know that one, I said. Old radiators. They talk in winter, but you get used to the conversation. He nodded. I'll take the bus. My car needs brakes. I'll drive you, I said, before I remembered that offering help could sound like retreating from the boundary I'd drawn. I'll drive you, I repeated, because it's efficient, not because you can't. He smiled in a way that made his face look briefly like his father's. Okay. We sat there until the mosquitoes found my ankles and I stood to go inside. He didn't follow. The line between us wasn't a wall or a hug. It was a property line finally marked on a map that both owners could agree on. At 10, I heard the quiet zipper of a suitcase being closed. At 10:30, the hushed fury of one being reopened and repacked, because fury always thinks it can make a better arrangement the second time. At 11, water running in the bathroom, the mirror taking in their faces, and offering them back with bluntness that cost it nothing. I slept like someone who had turned off a lamp that had burned for years. Morning brought the simple choreography of a house with multiple adults treating each other like neighbors, waiting in the hallway while someone else finished with the sink, wiping the countertops you didn't dirty, rinsing your cup. The small respect filled rooms the way steam does after a shower, briefly visible, but felt long after. At 8, Kayla stood in the doorway with a stack of folded clothes. I'll be out late, she announced to the air. Job leads. Good luck, I said. I meant it. There's nothing as clarifying as work that answers back. She left without slamming a door. That surprised us both. When she was gone, Michael came into the kitchen with the careful gait of someone learning new gravity. I keep thinking Dad would say something, he said. He would, I said, taking a breath I hadn't known I was saving. He'd say, process over panic. Then he'd make a list and hand you the pen. Michael's mouth twitched. He did like his lists. He liked knowing where work ended and life began, I said. He wasn't always good at it, but he respected the attempt. Michael poured coffee and didn't apologize for the cup he'd left on the counter yesterday. Progress comes in forms that only the person living them can see. Will you really pay first month? He asked, practical as a receipt. I will. I won't bring it up again. You can thank me once in a card if you need to tidy the feeling. He nodded. I might. He left for the bus, apartment list folded in his back pocket. I watched him go like you watch a good ship leave a harbor, proud, afraid, certain the ocean is both larger and kinder than the dock always imagined. Midday brought weather. A message from Tom. FYI, she's posted a long thing on social about abuse. Names redacted but obvious. Comments mixed. Also, our counsel available 3 p.m. Tomorrow, if you want to get ahead of it. I stared at the text until the words settled into their correct sizes. Rumor is a gas. It expands to fill the space you give it. Paper is a weight. It brings the balloon back to Earth. Book the 3 p.m., I wrote back. I'll be there. I didn't wander the comments. I watered the roses. I paid the trash bill. I wrote a list for the grocery store that didn't include snacks I only bought because I'd been told what grown people preferred to find waiting for them. At 2, Michael texted a photo, a tiny kitchen with a window over the sink, a radiator squat as a bulldog, floors scuffed the way honest wood gets. Maple, his caption said, smells like clean soap. Manager says it's quiet. I wrote, ask about heat included. Look at the caulk in the tub. If it's neat, the rest probably is. Then I put the phone down and cleaned the bathroom that was, for 30 days more, still our shared geography. At 3, he called. South Light is nicer, he said. Feels like morning, costs a little more. The manager shook my hand and looked me in the eye. I liked it. Then that's the one, I said. Get the lease. I'll write the first check. After that, you'll learn how satisfying it is to pay your own way. Silence. Then a quiet, okay, Mom? When he came home, Kayla was waiting with a jaw that had written its own manifesto. You're not rewarding this, she said, nails drumming the table to a rhythm only she could hear. You're not going to let her dictate your whole life. Michael set the application down like a flag. I'm picking a place, he said. I'll move out by the date on the notice. You can come with me if you want, or not. It was the closest I'd come, in years, to hearing the man under the noise speak. Kayla's mouth opened and closed. You're choosing her, she said. I'm choosing rent, he said, and quiet. The reversal landed soft but unmistakable. I had braced for a siege. Instead, my son stood in the doorway of his own life and didn't ask for permission to cross it. That night, I made pasta with garlic and tomatoes left to go sweet on the counter. I ate in the dining room with the newspaper folded back to a crossword. I filled in squares that asked for river names and old movie stars and a 5-letter word for boundary that wasn't wall. I wrote line. It fit. At 10, I laid out clothes for the morning. The charcoal suit, a clean white blouse, flats that could carry me city blocks without complaint. Tomorrow would be the small-town city's turn, the lawyer's office, the rumor circuit, the necessary language of affidavits, and carefully chilled water. Tonight, I walked one last loop through the house, touching the backs of chairs as I passed, straightening a frame, turning off the porch light. At the corkboard, I checked the notice again. Date, signature, the legal shape of compassion. The glass pear caught the lamplight and threw a small, sensible star onto the wall. I went to bed in the small room that had first felt like exile and now felt like a cabin on a ship pointed in the right direction. Through the window, the hummingbird's shadow flicked across the lilac in one last patrol before dark. The house breathed. I breathed with it. Paper had done its work. People were beginning to do theirs. Tomorrow, I would take my name into a room with a legal pad and let it be written down in the new story we were making, one line under another, steady as a chalk line, true as grain. The city liked to pretend it was a metropolis, all glass and lanes and people walking with headphones like assignments. But by lunchtime, 3 baristas, a parking attendant, and the woman at the copy shop knew more about my day than some cousins learned in a year. That's the thing about our skyline. It casts a big shadow on a very small town. At 2:50, I rode the elevator to the law firm whose name read like a door knocker. Miller and Close. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon and old books. Reception knew me without asking. Tom had arranged it the way men like Tom arrange things, quiet and thorough. Counsel met me with a file already started. She was compact, late 40s maybe, hair clipped back, eyes that measured without judging. I'm Chen, she said, shaking my hand like a colleague. Not a problem. We sat at a table that had heard more unhappy stories than a church pew. Give me facts, not feelings, she said, pulling a pad close. Dates, documents, witnesses. I did. The roast, the plate, the folder, the letter, the escort. The receptionist who'd thanked me, the operations lead who'd called the building, stuck. Lila's notes, Tom's texts. I slid printouts across like cards. Paper behaved. Chen's pen moved. 2 buckets, she said. Premises and employment. You have broad power over access to your building and standards of conduct on site. What you don't have is authority to terminate an employee of a tenant. If you framed it that way in writing, we'll need to reposition. I exhaled. The letter used the word termination on our stationery. She didn't flinch. Then today, we call it what it should have been, a revocation of building access for cause, coupled with a lease-compliant demand that the tenant address misconduct by its personnel. We cure the procedure by enforcing the contract, not the job. She asked for statements. I gave her names without giving her more names than our house could carry. The receptionist, the ops lead, Tom. Good, she said. No one loves a landlord, Ms. Hart, but judges love timelines. We'll build one. She tapped her pen. Now, the online thing. I've seen the post. She redacted names, but it's obvious. It will blow for 2 days, maybe 3. We don't respond there. We respond on letterhead. I felt my shoulders lower a fraction. Then reception called in. Courier just arrived, marked urgent to Miss Hart, the voice said through the speaker. Chen arched an eyebrow. Send it in. The envelope was heavy enough to make gravity smug. Tenants' Council, a name that preferred Latin to plain English. Chen slid it with a practiced thumbnail and scanned fast, lips thinning the way levees do when water rises. Demand for reinstatement to premises. Allegations of tortious interference. Gender bias, interesting. Request for retraction of statements made to subordinates. Threat of filing if no response by Friday. She swiveled the letter so I could read the phrases meant to make people smaller, willful, malicious, punitive. The room got about 5 degrees colder. The part of me that had learned to be a good host looked for coffee to pour for the threat. I kept my hands in my lap instead. All right, Chen said, voice even. Midpoint of the movie. She tapped the paper. This helps us more than it hurts. They're not confident. If they were, we'd have a lawsuit, not a demand for a do-over. Here's the gambit. We issue a notice to cure under the lease citing specific conduct, misrepresentation of authority, hostile conduct toward landlord's principal, unauthorized use of residential premises for commercial meetings. We attach sworn statements. We include the building's code of conduct you're going to adopt by 10 a.m. tomorrow. I don't have a code of conduct, I said. You do in 12 hours, she said, and smiled without showing teeth. We give them 10 days. If they cure, good. If they don't, you have grounds for default. Meanwhile, we reply to this letter with 3 lines. Access revoked for cause. Tenant invited to cure. Any allegation of bias denied. We also propose mutual non-disparagement and a no-admission release in exchange for their employees' permanent removal from your site. Will they agree? They will if they like rent, she said, and they do. We worked an hour more, turning life into lines that would stand upright in court if they had to. Tom emailed statements within 15 minutes of being asked. Lila added one with dates and badge logs. I typed my own calmly, resisting every urge to insert small adjectives that would feel good and weaken the spine of the document. At the bottom, I wrote my name in the hand my husband used to say, could steady a ship. By the time I left, the response letter was out, the notice to cure drafted, the code of conduct a skeleton waiting for flesh. Outside, the afternoon had gone glossy with heat. The city spilled into its end-of-day routine, buses sighing, cyclists slipping through lights, the kind of breeze that does more gossip than cooling. On the sidewalk, a woman I knew from the florist stopped me with that look small towns wear when they think they're being kind. Saw something online, she said. You okay, Ruth? Doing the work, I said. It was as true as anything else. At home, the house felt like a witness who'd been advised to keep his answers short. I ate a peach over the sink and then sat at the dining table with the draft of the code. 2 pages, not 7. Plain words. We respect staff and residents. Professional work happens in professional spaces. Misrepresentation of authority is a violation. I added, paper beats rumor. Then I crossed it out because a joke is a leak in a roof this week. Tom came by after dinner. We sat with the forms and his practical presence. Security pulled the footage from Sunday, he said, sliding a thumb drive across like contraband. It shows the plate, the spill, you kneeling, then you leaving clean. No audio, but facts don't always need sound. His jaw flexed. Also, you should know 3 tenants have emailed to say it's calmer already. Keep those, I said. We may need them. The notice to cure went out by messenger in a folder that didn't shake. At 9, my phone lit with a text from Michael. Signed. Move in the 28th. Keys on the 27th evening. Heat included. South Light. I pressed my thumb to the screen like blessing it. He came into the dining room in the shirt he wore to get jobs and decisions. First month? He asked, not sheepish, just finishing the list. I wrote the check, slid it across. I'm proud of you, I said. Not for choosing me, not for choosing against her, just for choosing a key that would open a door that belonged to him. He held the check for a second, long enough to feel the weight of a thing before it leaves your hand. She might not come, he said finally, voice careful. She says I'm betraying us. You're choosing rent and quiet, I said. If she wants those things, she knows where to find them. He nodded and left the room with steps that didn't scuff. The house loosened around the edges. Morning brought the pinch. My name, carefully not used, appeared on a local business blog under a headline designed to feed phones. Landlord versus girl boss firing goes viral at Atrium Tower. They had the facts wrong, but the narrative right. Which is worse. The comments were a casserole of certainty baked by strangers. A woman I hadn't seen since PTA messaged me a link with 2 exploding head emojis, and you? Attached. I set the phone face down and watered the rosemary. I answered Tom's text. Ignore the blog. Process over panic. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji that somehow came off like a salute. At 10, Chen called. They've received the cure notice, she said. They'd like to meet at 2. They will posture. You will bring me 2 copies of everything and the face you wore when you had teenagers. I can do that. You already are. The tenants' conference room was glass and brand words, the kind that look good on a t-shirt. Their counsel had a pocket square. Their CEO had a smile he'd practiced on investors. Chen set our stack on the table like a metronome. We're here for solutions, she said. They started with offense. I let it land and slide off. Chen waited for the second paragraph of their righteousness and then opened the lease to the page that treated conduct like a pipe that must not leak. 10 days to cure, she said, tapping with the pen that had reassured more landlords than saints. Your employee misrepresented authority and created a hostile condition for the principal of the landlord. Access revoked for cause. You may remove her from this site and continue to operate, or you may keep her and operate elsewhere. We're not in your HR. We are in our house. Pocket Square tried bias again. Chen went immovable. You're alleging discrimination because the person who behaved badly is a woman, she asked, mild as tea. We'll be happy to introduce a judge to the women on our side of the table who drafted these documents. The CEO shifted. He had numbers in his head. I could see them change columns. We need this to go away, he said, finally telling the truth. Our clients don't like noise. Then cure, Chen said, and sign a release so we can all return to quiet. They caucused in their fishbowl while Chen and I watched the atrium you could see from every angle. Down below, the fountain put on its same small show. People crossed carpet that turned footsteps into the kind of sound that won't scare prey. Life went on being itself without our permission. They came back in. We'll remove the employee from your premises, Pocket Square said, swallowing the word fire. We'll issue an internal memo clarifying that no one uses the landlord's name to get their way. We'll sign your non-disparagement. In return, you'll retract any statement implying she was terminated from her job. We'll say access revoked and conduct under review by tenant, Chen said. No more, no less. Fine, he said. And one more thing. Our lease expires in 9 months. We won't be renewing. This building's a fine space, but the small town city factor is not a fit for our brand. There was the counterpunch. It landed where money lives. 9 months to replace a line item that made smaller lines possible. I felt the floor tilt the slightest degree and waited to see if I would grab for a chair. I didn't. Some punches feel like weather. You don't take them personally even as you get wet. Understood, I said. We'll plan accordingly. My voice surprised me by sounding like I believed myself. On the sidewalk afterward, the wind caught the edges of my jacket and made a sail of it. Chen watched me like a coach checking for a sprain. You all right? She asked. I am, I said after checking. This was always going to cost something. It cost less than court, she said, and you still own a building that other people want to work in. We'll have a new tenant before they finish packing their succulents. I laughed then, quick and real. Thank you. Send me the final code of conduct when you've got it. And Ruth? Yes? Good work. I walked back to the garage. Ray lifted his hand. Heard the blog made a mess, he said, sympathetic without prying. Nothing a mop can't handle, I said. At home, the house met me with the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for engagement. On the table, my code of conduct waited with one last blank line for a signature. I signed it and felt the document become real in the way only ink can deliver. Michael came in at 5 with a paper bag of takeout and a face doing 3 things at once. She's going to her sister's tonight, he said, to think. Thinking is good, I said. He set the bag down. She said if I go through with this, I'm choosing a side. You're choosing a life, I said. Sides are for games. He was quiet a moment. I put the move-out date on the calendar, he said, gesturing toward the corkboard where the notice and the glass pair lived like roommates who had learned to share the light. The 28th. I'll start moving boxes next week. I'll label tape and keep score, I said, and he smiled in spite of himself. We ate at the table without filling the air to prove anything. After, I walked the roses, watered the hydrangea, checked the slope where rain likes to test the steps. The sky put on its evening act, the kind that makes even old fences look intentional. Inside, my phone pulsed. Chen had emailed the signed release and the tenant's shapely little memo. Employee removed from Atrium Tower. Conduct expectations clarified. Partnership with landlord ongoing. No admissions, no retractions, no victory lap. Just the sound of things returning to their proper size. I printed the memo and slid it into the folder that had started this version of my life. The folder wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a tool. In bed, I listened to a house recalibrating. Up the hall, a suitcase accepted its first serious load. Somewhere, a plastic hanger lost a fight with a sweater and snapped. In the small town city outside, a bus sighed and moved on. My eyes shut with the ease of someone who had spent a day turning weather into policy. Tomorrow would be part 5, whether I wanted it or not. Moving trucks, last-ditch speeches, the point where choices stop being threats and start being addresses you learn by heart. Tonight, I let the quiet have me. The grain of the floor ran true under every step I'd taken, even the ones that hurt. We were not done, but the line held. On the morning of the 28th, the house woke before I did. It had that charged hush old buildings get before a storm, joists holding their breath, pipes thinking about their next sentence. I lay there and counted the sounds I knew by heart. The refrigerator's sigh, the fence gate tapping twice in the breeze, a distant bus testing its brakes. By 7, I had tape, a marker, and a stack of flattened boxes on the dining table. Lines waited for names. Paper behaves. Michael shuffled in with bed hair and a face that had learned 3 new expressions in a month. "Truck's at 9, he said, voice steady like he was reading off a recipe he'd practiced. "Keys tonight." "Coffee," I said, already pouring. We didn't say the rest out loud. Last day, last boxes, last time we'd share this kitchen like this. Kayla came in dressed like a press release. Perfect hair, crisp blouse, sunglasses on top of her head like a crown. "We need more time," she announced to the air, bypassing good morning with the confidence of someone who thinks there's always a back door. "We don't," I said. "We've had 30 days. She laughed without humor. "And now you get to play the hero who tough-loved her son into adulthood." The comments loved that part. "I don't read comments," I said, and slid a roll of tape across to Michael. "Label the bedroom boxes, heavy on the bottom." He took the tape, and we began the choreography that ends one life and starts another. Books into boxes, plates into sleeves, shoes nested toe to heel. The house filled with the smell of cardboard and dust that had held onto the hidden edges of things for years. I wrote big block letters on each flap: kitchen, bath, closet, lines on brown paper turning chaos into a map. At 8:30, a moving truck idled at the curb in a diesel purr that made neighbors peek through blinds. 2 men climbed down, all forearms and practiced kindness. "Morning," one said with the particular cheer of people who see the worst and the best days of strangers and carry both for a fee. I led them through rooms that were about to stop being plural for Michael. "Only these," I said, tapping the stacks we'd staged in the hall, his bed frame, his dresser, boxes he'd lived out of for too long. "No house furniture." "Copy," the man said, measuring doorways with his eyes the way some people measure character. Kayla hovered, sunglasses now over her eyes like she needed to filter the day. "We can't take the dresser," she announced, as if the dresser's consent mattered. "It belongs here." "It belongs to the person who filled it," I said, "like everything else in the stack." She looked past me to Michael. "Tell her," she said. "Tell her this is insane." He didn't. He knelt to tape a box shut and wrote bedroom in letters that wobbled only a little. The movers lifted, turned, slid. I stood at the dining room threshold with my pen behind my ear, like I used to on days when a building opened and 100 people learned which key did what. Sweat found my spine and made a thin path south. When one of the movers bumped a door jamb and muttered an apology to the wood, I forgave him in advance. The house had been forgiven for worse. Halfway through the morning, the crisis arrived on 2 feet and a phone, stabilized mounted like a sword. Kayla stepped onto the porch and went live to an audience I couldn't see. "Hey, friends," she began, voice pitched to the microphone, face finding its light. "We're being unfairly forced out today, and I need you all to witness." I opened the front door and stood on the other side of the screen. "This is a private home," I said, steady. "You may film your things, not me, not the neighbors." She swiveled the lens toward me like a spotlight. "This is the landlord mother," she said, choosing the hyphen like it would cut. "She thinks power is a personality." I kept my hands at my sides. "Kayla," I said, quiet, as if we were 2 people in a small room instead of 1 woman and her audience. "You're using strangers to make noise on a day that requires care. Please put the phone away." She smiled the way people do when they believe in performance more than outcomes. "You can't stop me," she said. "I can't," I agreed, "but the truck leaves at noon whether there's a camera or not." The movers kept moving because work done right doesn't wait for the internet. One of them passed with a box labeled books and winked at me like a man who has learned to keep his sense of humor in his back pocket for emergencies. The chat on Kayla's screen scrolled with emojis and opinions. I could see my porch reflected in her sunglasses, a funhouse where every detail was content. At 11, a sedan I recognized from the florist pulled up and idled. The woman inside looked like someone sent by a committee named Concern. She didn't get out. She watched, then drove away. Small town city, big shadow. I breathed through it. Inside, Michael held a drawer like an artifact. "I found Dad's watch at the back," he said, voice gone small for a second. I took it from his palm, weighty with years and his father's knack for being on time. The leather had darkened where a wrist had taught it to curve. "He'd want you to wear it," I said, "but only if you can stand the extra story it will tell about you." He smiled a crooked smile that knew enough to be sad and proud at once. "I can stand it." We wrapped the watch in a sock and set it in a box labeled top drawer like a prayer. 5 minutes to noon, the last box went into the truck. The movers did their math in their heads, wrote a number on a carbon copy, and held it out to Michael. He paid with the check I'd written this morning, his name on the line, his signature a little different now than it had been when he was 19. The driver tore his half, slapped the side of the truck twice, some rituals don't need explaining, and climbed in. Kayla, seeing her set being struck without a final monologue, made her last move. She closed her phone, stepped close, and lowered her voice to the intimacy of a threat. "You win," she said. "This isn't a game," I said. "It's a house." She shook her head, pity painted on like mascara. "He'll resent you forever," she said, like a curse. "He'll call me when you fall and ask me what to do." "If I fall," I said, "I'll call a doctor. He'll call his landlord." I let it land without flinching. "You can come to Sunday dinner in a year if you learn how to be kind. If not, you can keep walking. Either way, I won't be on my knees cleaning up after you again." Her mouth made a small, surprised "oh," like a fish learning the glass is not the lake. "You're cruel," she whispered. "I'm clear," I said. She turned to Michael for the last time, reaching for the part of his face that still believed in rescues. "Well?" she asked. "Are you coming or not?" He looked at me, then at the truck, then at his hands, which had learned how to hold and let go in the same month. The watch sat in a box behind him, waiting to be a habit. He took a breath that straightened his shoulders an inch. "I'm coming," he said, "to my apartment, with my stuff. If you want to be there, be there. If you want to go live, go live." Reversal. "Not with trumpets," with a sentence said in a tone that belongs to adults. Kayla's jaw flexed. She stepped toward the truck, then back, calculating 100 tiny strategies and finding them all too small for the size of the day. "I have a meeting," she said finally, the last refuge of people who don't know what else to do. "I'll be at my sister's. Text me." "I will," Michael said, and the promise was so clean it squeaked. She walked down the path, phone already up, finding her light. The truck door rolled down in a corrugated sigh. The driver eased from the curb. Michael took the last box, an awkward light one full of hangers, and looked at me over its top like a boy on the first day of school. "Come see it?" he asked, "just to make sure the stove works." "I will," I said, "after we do the keys." He set the box down, and we stood by the front door where the house keeps its ceremonies. I held out my palm. He dropped his copy of the house key into it, metal warm from his pocket. It was like returning a borrowed book you finally finished. He looked at the key and then at the floorboards where the gravy stain used to be and swallowed. "I'm not choosing against you," he said, voice low. "I'm choosing me. That's all I ever wanted," I said, and meant it more than anything. We drove to South Light in my car, the boxes thudding soft in the trunk like hearts. The manager met us with a clipboard and a smile that had learned to say welcome 1,000 different ways. "Heat included," he confirmed, handing over a ring with 2 keys and a tag. "Laundry's in the basement, quarters or the app, either's fine." The apartment smelled like leased wood and fresh paint. Morning came in sideways through a window that knew its job, the radiator hunkered in the corner like a bulldog that would watch his winter. Michael set a box on the counter, tried the sink, opened a cabinet, looked at me with the sudden panic of a diver in the air. "What do I buy first?" "Trash bags, toilet paper, salt, matches," I said, "the catechism of first places. A broom, olive oil, a sponge. A small rug that will keep you from hating mornings when you're barefoot." He wrote it down on the back of the receipt. "Okay." We carried in boxes until our arms learned the weight of a new life. When we were done, we stood in the doorway and looked at what wasn't yet home and would be. "I can come back later and help," I said, careful not to make a nest out of an offer, "or I can let you figure it out." He looked around the room as if it were talking to him in a language he'd practice until he didn't have to translate. "I think I should figure it out," he said, "but maybe call me at 9 to make sure I remembered towels." 9, I said. "I'll bring a toolbox tomorrow. You'll need a level. Things feel flat when they aren't." He laughed. "Dad used to say that." "He was right," I said, "about a lot and wrong about some. Like the rest of us." On the way back, the city did what cities do on afternoons that have decided to redeem themselves. A bus driver waved someone through, a man carried 2 pizzas like he was smuggling treasure, a breeze out-argued the heat. At a red light, my phone buzzed. A text from Chen. "Release filed, cure accepted. Tenant to relocate, end of term. Smooth waters from here unless someone chooses a storm." I thumbed back a thank you and put the phone face down. The road turned green. At home, the quiet waited like a chair you love. On the dining table, a few gray lines of dust made geometry where the boxes had been. I drew my finger through one and left a clean stripe. Lines in the dust. This is where something was and isn't. This is where something will be and isn't yet. I gathered the spare keys from the bowl again, basement, shed, back gate, and took them to the hardware store where a man with a name tag ground new ones, while we talked about the weather the way people do when what they mean is change. Back at the house, I set one on my ring and put the rest in an envelope marked with today's date. Proof for a judge I hoped I'd never meet. Paper behaves. At 5, Michael texted a photo. His bed assembled crooked, a pot on the stove, 2 plates like optimism. "Forgot salt," he wrote. "Remembered towels." I sent back a picture of the glass pair catching late sun on the corkboard and a note. "Proud of you." 9 p.m. call. At 6, Kayla's car paused at the curb and then kept going. No camera out the window, no last flourish. Just a small sedan threading a small-town city that had learned one more of my business items and had already begun to make room for other news. Dusk did its work, turning the yard indigo and making the roses smell like they do when they think no one's watching. I deadheaded the spent blooms and left them in a neat pile that would become soil if the world was kind, and I kept doing the little things right. The house and I did the last hard conversation at 8:30. I walked room to room and said the quiet names of things I'd let go of. The way the sun laugh used to bounce off the stairwell, the double footsteps on holidays, the daily clatter I complained about and will not miss, and will miss anyway. In the dining room, I stood where the plate had hit, and where the stain had faded, and where I had drawn so many lines. I put my palm flat on the grain. "True," it said under my skin, "true." At 9, I called. He answered on the second ring. "I bought salt," he announced, triumphant, "and forgot a can opener." "I have a spare," I said. "Tomorrow." There was a pause, the kind that holds a question that isn't a request. "Mom?" he said. "Yes. Thanks for not making it a war." "I don't fight my family," I said. "I build a fence and a gate." He laughed softly. "Gate's good." "Gate's good," I agreed. We hung up with the ease of people who plan to call again. I locked the front door and listened to the bolt seat itself in the strike plate, a sound older than the internet. Then I slid the envelope with the old keys into the folder that had outlasted everything this month and placed the glass pair on top. The crisis had crested and passed. The climax had been quiet, which is the kind that lasts. Tomorrow I would return to the building and sign something dull that mattered. I would sweep the lines and the dust into a pan and drop them in the trash, and the house would be lighter by ounces and years. I turned out the light and felt the dark accept me. The small room down the hall, mine, waited with a bed that had held me steady through a month of weather. I lay down without bracing. Somewhere, a hummingbird slept with its heart racing, ready to do what it does again in the morning. We weren't done, but the work had tipped from tearing down to putting right. The line held and the dust learned the shape of the floor again. Tomorrow, roses and keys. The locksmith showed up just after breakfast with a canvas bag that clinked like a pocketful of small decisions. He was one of those quiet men who narrate the work under their breath to keep the world in order. "Riquet the front," he said to the door. "Fresh cylinders on the back and basement." I made coffee and let him do the kind of repair that makes a house breathe easier. When he finished, he set 3 keys on the dining table, silver on wood where a stain used to tell on us. "These are yours," he said. "I cut 2 extras." "Leave 1, I told him, and wrote Michael on a tag in my neat hand. Not the old brass copy that said son, a new one that said guest. Ceremony matters, even in metal. After he left, the house felt different by half a degree, like I'd shifted a picture until it hung true. I walked room to room not to check for intruders, but to reacquaint the place with my footsteps. In the bedroom, I opened the windows and let the morning in, the curtains leaning out like gossiping ants. The small room at the end of the hall, my exile-turned cabin, looked suddenly like a retreat instead of a sentence. I kept it, not as a punishment, as a preference. Some spaces you choose again because you like who you are inside them. On the corkboard, the notice sat under the glass pair with today's date and a small note. Keys changed, receipts filed. Paper behaves. I slid the envelope of old keys into the folder with the other finished things. A month of weather flattened into pages and fastened the elastic. Tom called at 10. "We signed a letter of intent," he said, voice warm with well-earned satisfaction. "Architects, 3-year term, less noise, more rent." "Good," I said. "Quiet money." "Lila's pushing the badge updates," he added. "Code of conduct rolled out this morning. Someone already emailed to say it made them exhale." I could picture Lila at her desk, building peace out of clip art and bullet points. "Tell her thank you," I said. "Tell yourself the same." At lunch, I made a sandwich and ate it at the head of the table, not as a declaration, just because the view is better there. The roses outside needed deadheading again, summer's way of keeping you honest, so I took the shears and worked down the fence line. Every clipped bloom made room for another if the bush wanted to keep doing its job. I tossed the spent heads into a bucket and ran the hose along the roots. A hummingbird strafed the lilac and scolded me the way tiny things do when they forget their size. I apologized out loud. We both went back to work. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the tower. Ray raised the gate with a flourish that made me grin. "New tenant touring?" he asked. "Soon," I said. "Today I'm signing something dull that matters." In the atrium, people moved through light I paid for and didn't take for granted. Across the way, the suite where Kayla had held court had been emptied of her particular noise. 2 potted plants soldiered on, loyal to water, not story. I stood at the rail and let the fountain's patient practice recalibrate my breathing. In my office, I initialed pages that would never make a headline. Service contracts, a quarterly maintenance plan, a memo about the freight elevator's temper. Lila brought in a tray of water and made me sign one more line, the kind that formalizes what everyone is already doing. "You didn't have to," I said. "Paper likes company," she said, and left with that small smile people carry when they've watched something hard change, shape, and live. On my way out, the receptionist from the tenant across the atrium caught my eye and lifted a hand in that shy wave of workplace civilians, acknowledging a battle they didn't have to fight. I returned it and kept walking. Gratitude can be quick. It's still true. At 5, I drove to South Light with a bag of first apartment things rattling in the passenger seat. Trash bags, matches, salt, a sponge, a small rug rolled like a secret. The building's hallway smelled like laundry and someone's curry. Michael opened the door with the clumsy pleasure of a person whose key fits. The room behind him looked like a puzzle he was enjoying. Boxes halfway done, bed frame true this time, blinds raised just enough to make the light say, "Welcome." "I bought salt," he said, flourishing it like a prize, "and forgot a knife." I handed him one from my bag that could do almost everything. "Don't cut onions with it on cardboard," I said. "Use a plate." "Your knives will thank you." He set the rug by the sink and wiggled his toes on it like a kid. "This is ridiculous," he said, grinning. "It's so much better with a rug." "Most things are," I said. We put away plates and pretended not to notice the lump in both our throats. On the counter sat the watch in its sock and a picture in a cheap frame. The four of us at a beach years ago, sunburned and squinting, the dog we all pretended wasn't ours leaning into our legs. He caught me looking. "It was at the back of a drawer," he said. "I'm keeping it where I'll see it." "Good," I said. The dog was not ours, by the way. "Sure?" he said. "Like the couch wasn't ours for 6 years." We laughed, the kind that loosens something caught. When I left, I stood in the doorway and did not give him 10 last instructions. I gave him one. If something breaks and you can't fix it, call the landlord before it becomes a bigger thing. That's not failure. "That's how buildings and people stay friends," he saluted with the sponge. "Process over panic," he said. I drove home just as the small-town city did its evening trick, turning familiar into pretty without changing a thing. At a light, Kayla's name lit my phone. A single text. "Move some things to my sister's. I'll send for the rest. Don't worry about me." There was a picture of a new desk, a plant in good light. No performance, no ask, just a dispatch from someone else's beginning. I typed, "Wishing you steady ground," and left it there. Not reconciliation, not war, a fence and a gate. That Saturday, I hosted no one and felt the kind of loneliness that isn't a wound. It was an acreage. I walked it. I bought a pie at the farmer's market and ate one slice with a fork and one over the sink because nobody was there to tell me not to. In the afternoon, I cleaned the baseboards because they had been ignored in all the drama and deserved better. While I worked, I talked to the house out loud and thanked it for not collapsing while I learned its language again. The floor answered in the way wood does, by holding. Sunday, I cooked without an audience. Roast chicken, potatoes crisped in honest fat, a salad that asked nothing of anyone. I set one plate at the head and one at the side and left the rest of the table bare. Michael arrived on time carrying a plant he'd already forgotten the name of. "Housewarming," he said, and then corrected himself. "Apartment warming. But this place remembers me." "It does," I said, and took the plant like it was a certificate of completion. I gave him his guest key on the small tag I'd written. He turned it over, read Michael in my hand, and nodded like a man receiving an oath. "I'll text before I use it," he said. "Please do," I said. "Neighbors knock." We ate and learned the new rules, how conversation sounds when it isn't doing the heavy lifting of a month of repair. He told me about a manager who remembered his name after one day and the way the radiator clicked like a metronome. I told him about dull, beautiful memos and a new tenant who thought our elevators had character, which is the nicest way to say a machine disapproves of your schedule. We avoided Kayla's name the way you avoid salt on a healing cut, not to deny the wound, to let the skin set. After dinner, he washed the dishes while I dried, the choreography we'd invented decades ago when he stood on a stool, and I pretended not to see the tidal wave he created in the sink. When he left, he hugged me like he meant it, and not like a receipt. I watched his tail lights disappear down the block and didn't try to make the street keep him. In the weeks that followed, life arranged itself into something recognizable and better. Morning walks along the roses, deadheading as needed, watering at the base, not the leaves. Workdays with lists that ended and a building that felt like a colleague, not a toddler. A Tuesday movie with a friend I hadn't seen in too long because I'd been practicing crisis. A Wednesday where the most dramatic thing that happened was finding a screw on the floor and realizing it belonged to the hinge on the linen closet. I put it back. The door swung true. One afternoon, a courier brought the final check from the tenant who decided we were too small town for their brand. I signed the receipt, filed the closure, and didn't spend a thought on whether they'd missed the fountain. I had an architect's lease to countersign and a meeting with Tom about replacing the carpet on 14 with something that stretched without showing it. Lila emailed a photo of the break room whiteboard where someone had written, "Be decent. Clear beats clever." I printed it and stuck it under the pair. On a Thursday, the watch made its debut on Michael's wrist. He sent me a picture of his hand on a bus pole, the leather band dark against skin he'd scraped moving a chair. "Running on time," the caption read. I sent back a picture of my pruning shears, and so am I. The house grew lighter by ounces you couldn't see. I donated what wasn't wanted, stacked what was, painted a wall the color of morning toast because it made the room remember breakfast even at night. I bought a new rug for the dining room and watched it teach the chairs how to sit square. I allowed myself a new mirror and stood in front of it each day long enough to make sure I wasn't getting small to keep the peace. One evening, I found the last faint shadow of the old stain when the sun came in, low and rude. I knelt with a cloth and a little vinegar and patience. It yielded the way old marks do when you meet them with both firmness and mercy. When I stood, the floor held nothing but grain. True, it said. True. The keys found their rhythm in the bowl by the door, mine, the shed, the back gate, the basement, and the one that said Michael. Quiet metal, not a promise, not a threat. Just a way in for someone who knocked first. Late in the month, I sat on the porch with a book I didn't need to finish to earn my rest. The small-town city took its evening lap, a jogger with reflective stripes, a kid in a cape on a scooter, two teenagers talking like they'd invented speech. A neighbor waved, the roses had another round in them. The hummingbirds strafed, forgiven in advance. My phone buzzed on the armrest. A text from Kayla, no filigree, got a job. Different building, different me, I hope. A photo of a desk with a view and a plant that looked like it might live. I typed, good. Good is durable. Then I put the phone down. The gate stays open. The fence stays up. When the porch light clicked on, I took my keys and went inside. I locked the front door and felt the bolt seat the way good choices do, with weight, not noise. In the dining room, the glass pair threw a small, sensible star on the wall. I touched the folder one more time and put it on the shelf behind the cookbooks where finished storms go. I turned off the lamp and let the dark have me, not as erasure, as rest. I had not won. I had rebuilt. The house and I had learned each other again. The building breathed at my back like a city-sized animal I knew how to feed. My son slept under his own roof with salt in the cabinet and a rug by the sink. The roses would ask for more clipping tomorrow. The keys would be in the bowl where they belonged. I went to bed in the small room I chose because it told the truth back to me. Outside, someone's wind chimes negotiated with the breeze. Inside, the grain ran true under everything. I slept the way doors do when they fit their frames, closed, sure, ready to open for the right knock. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.